Just a little reminder, guys, we have a pretty good group tonight, which is very exciting. So we will ask you to mute yourselves just so that we don't get feedback. Like Carol said, if you have any questions as we go, depending on the length and how many people we have joining us, we'll try to incorporate them throughout the presentation. But if not, we'll get to them at the end and we'll give you information for reaching out after the fact. So feel free to throw your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get going tonight. I see a lot of new faces and I see a lot of familiar faces. So thank you all so much for joining this evening. I'm Caitlin, I'm the Senior Manager of Grassroots Advocacy. And tonight we have Carol and she's on the Grassroots team. And then you'll hear from April in a little bit. She's also on the Grassroots team. And we have guest speakers as well this evening. We always like to start by giving you a little bit of background about what the 2025 Action Team is. What is this meeting that you're a part of? And this amazing group of advocates from all across the nation. For those of you who may be new and may not have attended any of our calls in the past. And the long and short of it is really we're a group of individuals from all around the country who care about people and pets. We want to build out our support. We want to meet new people and really be an inclusive and diverse group of advocates from all around the nation who can come together, bring our unique talents, our unique abilities, and really create this force of people that are better than the individual parts that we bring to it. And this collective force to support our shelters, our animals, our neighbors, our friends, our families. We talk to fellow community members, we connect on common goals and needs, and ultimately we work together to create safe, compassionate communities for pets and people alike. What we wanted to talk to you about this evening is now that we're kind of in this new normal, as we like to call it, where things are starting to open back up. I know for some of us, there is a little bit of fear that we might be shutting back down, but all in all, where we're at this year is a new normal, right? We're thriving we're really needing that human connection. A lot of us have been in isolation for a year and a half. So people really want that human connection, but we're also facing new challenges as a nation. What we're facing here in 2021 is certainly very different than where we were at last year. And it's very different than the year before and all the years previous to that. What we're facing as people, as a nation, as animal welfare professionals is just new. And as we're kind of opening up in some places, the struggles and the issues that they're facing are not entirely uncommon, but the resources and how we're addressing them, we're kind of having to be creative and work together collaboratively in new and different ways, ultimately to come up with solutions. So to understand how we as a community, as an action team can help with these issues, we really need to have a better understanding of the variety of issues that we're facing across the nation, what shelters are dealing with every day, what people and their pets are dealing with every day, and what shelter workers are dealing with. So with that, we have a guest speaker tonight, Audrey. She is a strategist for our regional teams, and I'll let her give you a little bit more information about herself. But ultimately, she works up and down the East Coast with shelters, rescue groups, volunteers, and she is part of our national regional team. So she has a really good pulse on what's going on all across the nation. And she's going to give us a little bit of background to help us as an action team and as community members figure out how we can rally together and support that. With that, Audrey.
Hi, everybody. So I'm so happy to be here talking with you guys, and I'm going to go ahead and give you some insight into what animal shelters are sort of dealing with right in this moment. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's new and sort of what challenges might be the same from before COVID, and how we can support our shelters and our communities. So what you'll see on the screen there is a shot of our life-saving dashboard. And I know that some of you may have seen this before, it sounds like, but if you have not seen this before, you can visit our website at bestfriends.org/2025-goal and check this out. And what this dashboard is it's a way for you to see in your community where your shelters are at with life-saving. And so this is just, I wanted to give everybody a national overview. And so this data is actually from our new data set So it's from 2020. And we, as a national organization, one of the things that we do is collect data on animals entering the shelters. How do they come into the shelters? What are the ways that that happens? And then how do the animals leave the shelters? And then how many of those outcomes are what we call live outcomes versus non-live outcomes, and how we can move that needle so that we have more live outcomes. So right now in 2020, we had about 4.3 million animals enter animal shelters. And that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but just to give you some perspective, in the 80s, when these numbers were first sort of tentatively being tracked, that number was more like 17 million. So we've come a long way already. So we're at 4.3 million animals entering shelters in 2020. And of those 4.3 million, 3.5 million of those animals had live outcomes. So that's great. And that gave us a number that we call save rate. So that's what percentage of animals leaves the shelter with a live outcome. And that number in 2020 was 83% nationally. So that is pretty good. And that leaves us with a life-saving gap of 347,000 dogs and cats left to save. And again, that number in the 80s was the number of animals being killed, in the 80s in shelters was 17 million estimated. So when you think about starting at that 17 million and going to 347,000, we've made a lot of progress, but 347,000 is a lot of animals. So we have a lot of work left to do. So you can go to the next slide. Okay, so we are in the time of year where we are in puppy and kitten season in shelters. And this happens every year. This certainly happened before COVID, and every year it gets a little better, but it certainly does still happen. So this is the time of year when animal shelters are busiest. And that's because this is the time of year that puppies and kittens flood our shelters. We have more animals being born this time of year. And puppies and kittens are cute and adorable, but they take a lot of resources, right? We know that they eat a lot and drink a lot and require a lot of hands-on care because they're messy and require a lot of medical resources. So this time of year is particularly hard for shelters because they are full of puppies and kittens, along with all of their normal other animals that are coming in. And another challenge that is, sort of the same kind of that was happening before COVID and is still happening now is veterinary shortages. So across the country, we are seeing less and less vets available to work in animal shelters. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One reason is that some corporate veterinary hospitals are buying up some of the smaller mom and pop practices, and also less vets are coming out of school. And what that does is it gives a veterinary shortage to shelters. And so that's a difficult challenge because it affects how fast shelters can move animals through their system, right? How fast they can get their animals spayed or neutered, how fast they can access care. And then of course, staffing issues are always a challenge for animal shelters. They tend to have a smaller staffing budget, and the work is hard. We know it's difficult and emotional work, even though it's very rewarding. And so hiring and retaining staff can be difficult. So those are some of the things that were already happening pre-COVID and are still going on now. And you can go to the next slide. And so what happened as a result of COVID? So there were good things and bad things that happened with shelters as a result of COVID. But one of the big challenges that shelters are facing right now is staffing struggles are getting much harder. A lot of people had the experience of being remote, and a lot of shelters expanded their programming in order to help keep pets with their people and keep animals out of the shelter. And so now they're trying to maintain that programming while also having an increase of animals that are coming into their physical buildings, right? So a lot of people want to stay remote, and most shelter work is hands-on. And then, just hiring, retaining people is always challenging, which makes volunteering really important to kind of fill those gaps. And then, veterinary shortages, even through COVID, one of the wonderful things that happened is that so many people adopted pets, right? And so that's great. But now these adopted pets need medical care. And the result of that is that there's a lot of veterinary appointments just for the public that are happening, which is great. People are taking good care of their pets. but it does impact shelters because it is sometimes harder for them to get the access to the veterinarians. So anytime that that happens, it's going to make the length of stay in animal shelters a little longer while they get moved through and get their medical needs taken care of, which causes shelters to be more full. And we all know that during COVID, we had a huge adoption boom, and that was wonderful. People were home and adopting more animals, and those animals that showing are staying in their homes and they're doing well. But now adoptions maybe are, I'm not going to say they're slowing down, but they're kind of returning to a pre-pandemic level where we don't have this boom. So we have sort of more animals in the shelter, and adoptions are not happening as quickly as they were happening last year. And so in the Northeast, which is one of the major outlets for transport, which is when you take animals from one shelter and move them to another, one shelter overfull to a shelter that has less room. One of the things that we're seeing is that the slower adoptions are slowing down transport. So there's less movement. And again, that just means that animal shelters are fuller than they would like to be. And you can go to the next slide. So good. What's the good news? There is good news. As a result of COVID, shelters got really good at keeping animals out of shelters, right? So now we see more foster programs. We see more types of animals going to foster than we ever had before. And we see them going to foster faster too, which is cool. And we are better at telling the public what we need about our managed intake processes, when we can take an animal, how we can take an animal, what that looks like to make sure the animal has a better outcome. And we're also way better at keeping animals in their home. We're better at talking with people about what they need to keep their pets with their family. And the other thing I would say is that COVID forced shelters to innovate, right? Shelters had to be very brave in COVID. And just for perspective, I was actually working in a shelter when the pandemic hit. It was before I was employed with Best Friends. And so I had to empty my whole shelter out in like 3 days, and I had to do some things I hadn't done before, and it was good. It forced us to be brave. And when you're forced to do that, what that does is it shows you that some of the fears maybe that you had weren't necessary. And we're seeing a lot of those things carry over to shelters now. So you can go to the next slide. And so what does all of this mean for shelters? So right now, there's a lot of animals in our shelters, and our shelters are certainly feeling that. And more animals in shelters right now means more need for community to help the shelters, right? The community members really are the safety for the animals. So animal shelters and animals need to have a safe place to go, and the shelters rely on community members to provide that safe place. And so that is why folks like the action team are super important, because you guys really are the ones who bring the help. Okay.
Right. Thanks, Audrey. I particularly loved what you said about how COVID made shelters have to innovate, because I do think in so many ways, and I say this as like a former tenured shelter worker, it forces us to trust our communities when we may struggle with it a little bit as individuals and rescue workers. So I think that's really important. And I did want to actually ask you a couple of the questions in the chat while this is fresh in everybody's mind. And one of them was a question about the data, the math gap. Why is the kill number 347K as opposed to 800K? So Can you, because one person was concerned that maybe puppies and kittens dying in shelter from disease weren't necessarily being counted towards that. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. It really is. So when we say no kill, what we mean by no kill is a 90% benchmark, a 90% save rate. So in other words, if your shelter, say, takes in 100 animals and you save 70 of them, your life-saving gap isn't 30, it's 20, because 20 is the difference between 70 and 90%. And we use 90% as a benchmark because it's basically been shown that that 90% number is attainable by organizations who have implemented the most progressive programming. So shelters who are doing their best to do all of the things that are proven to work, we know that those organizations, for the most part, can hit 90%. It's a proven metric. The reason that it is not 100% is because sometimes, despite doing everything we possibly can, animals are going to not have a live outcome. And the reasons for that might look like they are medically too sick to be saved. So it doesn't matter how much vet care that you provide or how much medicine or how much round the clock, they're just, for whatever reason, medically critical and they can't be saved. Or they could be potentially behaviorally dangerous and not safe to place into a community. So those are the two main reasons that shelters do have euthanasia. So the 90% metric recognizes that maybe 1 in 10 animals is not going to have a live outcome.
Great, that's really helpful. And then another question is, how does Best Friends work with shelters? How do we form partnerships? And what are some benefits that shelters have in working with us?
Yeah, so that's actually a lot of what my job is working directly with shelters. And we work with shelters in all kinds of ways, but what it really comes down to is Best Friends keeps we have all of these amazing resources, and we have a wonderful team here at Best Friends that works really hard to know what things work and what the best practices are. And then we talk with shelters about what it is that they need. And we really talk with them and get to know what their challenges are, why these things are challenges. And then we give them custom solutions and kind of stay right with them while they implement those things. And help them save more lives. Really and truly, it's one-on-one bespoke attention that we give these shelters.
It's really helpful. And I think it's really important for us to remember too on these calls. It's like we have so many great experts like Audrey and her whole team who are working with shelters all across the nation. We have shelters and frontline workers who have been really stretched throughout COVID and even before that, right? They've been working so hard to save all the animals. But we need the community, we need people, we need everybody to do what they can do, even if it's just one small step, one action. If everybody takes one small action and one small step, it provides so much more support and bandwidth for Audrey, for her team, for all shelters and rescue organizations. And again, it's that collective power behind this effort. So when we were talking about where we're at today and where we've come, we really want to think about it in terms of what does this mean for community and what does this mean for the action team? And one thing I do want to point out as well is that, to Audrey's points, it's like every community is going to be a little bit different. The needs of the local shelter, the needs of your neighbors, your friends, your family who live around you may look a little bit different. Some shelters might be struggling with adoptions, and that's why they can't transport in. Other shelters might be struggling with having too many cats, and really they're doing good on dogs, but they really need cat help. Other places may have a lot of resources, but they're struggling to get that resource information out into the community. So we do want you to kind of think about where you're located in the country, utilize some of these resources that Audrey talked about, the dashboard. Take a step back and really think about your community, where you guys are at, and how can you help your shelters and your community keep pets out of shelters and in their homes. And I know that can feel a little bit overwhelming, but honestly, we can all do really small things to make an impact. So we wanted to provide you with some tools on this call and some real examples of the small steps that you guys can take, because we know not everybody is equipped today. And I speak as somebody who is not in a place right now to foster or adopt an animal because my home is very full. So, but I still want to be plugged in. I still want to help and I want to support that. And last year we saw it, right? We saw last year that people rallied together to support each other. We supported our neighbors when we thought maybe we're strapped as tight as we possibly can, but then we knew our neighbor needed help walking her dog and she wasn't equipped to do it during COVID. So we figured out how to work together as families, as friends, as neighborhoods, and help each other as human beings, and by extension, like our pets and our community as a whole. We went through these unprecedented times. And it's a new year with new and different issues facing us. But again, it's a time for us to rally together and support each other, support our animals, support our emergency workers and our shelter staff and individuals who have helped us so much throughout this whole year. So April is going to hop on to talk about some tools and some easy things that we can all do to help spread the word and kind of connect together as community members.
Thanks, Caitlin. Hello, everyone. I'm April Muller, digital advocacy lead on the grassroots team with Best Friends. And like Caitlin said, there's a lot of little small things that we can each do to kind of support our community. One of the things we did last year is rolled out community kindness cards. Some of you may have been around for that. And we made these printable cards that people could leave at neighbors' doorsteps or mailboxes that said, you know, hey, I'm in the neighborhood and I'm available to help if you can't leave your house, if you're quarantined, if you're isolated. And these cards, as simple as they were, created a really good ripple effect because this dog in this photo, for example, its name is Count Chocula. This is one of our colleagues' dogs. She put this sign up in her condo building and she got responses from other people in the building offering to help her help anyone else, like, you know, offering to give her gas money if anyone needed, you know, a trip to the pet store to get pet food, things like that. And these really helped people connect with and support their neighbors during a time of isolation. And now that people are coming out of that isolation, like we've said, there's new challenges. There's people that bought or adopted pets during the pandemic that were really excited about them, and they're now coming across challenges that they didn't expect, like separation anxiety, lack of opportunities to socialize their puppies. Maybe they broke up with or lost a partner that previously helped care for the pet. Maybe they lost a job. There's all these challenges that could result in people struggling to care for their pets now. And so what we want to do is challenge you to come up with your own community kindness cards through social media where you offer to help people in your community with the expertise and the resources that you know about that they probably don't. I think it's something that I see a lot where people who are really involved with animal rescue or volunteer at their local shelter, you assume that everyone else knows what you know about dogs and cats, but the truth is that they do not. And so just by putting yourself out there, you can go to the next slide, by the way. Just by putting yourself out there on whatever channels you use, I use the examples of Facebook and Instagram here, you could be a resource for somebody who may be on the border of giving up their pet just because they don't know how to access a pet food pantry, or they don't know, you know, that their local shelter provides a low-cost vaccine clinic. And by providing those resources, posting them into Facebook groups, for example, you could be the difference between somebody bringing their pet to the shelter or being able to keep it. So I put some ideas on here. We're going to actually roll out some resources in the coming month that we'll be able to share on social media. But in the meantime, what I recommend is just to watch the Facebook groups that you're involved in. A lot of people are in local buy nothing groups or community groups, and people will post about pets that they found or that they have, and you can be a resource for those people. Another option is to invite people to ask you questions. So this is something that I did recently. I moved to a brand new state, the other side of the country, and started making friends with people in the area through bike riding, but they don't know that I am involved with animal welfare. So I started posting, hey, I have 2 dogs and I've been involved with volunteering for, you know, a decade. If you have any questions about this, I'm a resource for that as well. And it's surprising how often people will take you up on that opportunity just because you asked. People that you may not have heard from in a while, that you became friends with on social media and haven't really talked to, they'll message you because you gave them an explicit opening to do that. A lot of people are shy, they don't want to reach out, and they don't know who to talk to. But if you position yourself as that resource, you'll be surprised who comes around and asks you for advice. Next slide is some examples. Actually, stay on this slide, sorry. So I forgot to bring up kindness is your credential. That's something I included. I read it in a book. I think the author is Emily McDowell. She's a greeting card writer. She has this amazing book about how to support your friends through trauma and grief. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is that people often don't say anything because they think they're not close enough with somebody to offer support or to offer condolences. And the point she made was that kindness is your credential. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a therapist. You just are kind, and that's what you have to give. And I think that that's a great thing to remember, is that you know more about animals than a lot of people, and you're already trying to help by being a kind person. So don't be afraid to offer help, but the thing to make sure you're doing is to give ideas and not criticism. I didn't want to skip past that in the Facebook group section, because that's something we see a lot, is somebody posts something and you're really excited about what you know, but it could come off as judgmental if you're not careful. So we want to be open and accessible, because if people feel like they're being judged, if they feel like they're being looked down on or criticized, that's going to make them less likely to ask for help, and they're just going to go straight to the shelter because they have no other outlets. Just remember to be kind and accessible. All right, next slide. These are some examples that I made for Instagram. You know, again, it may not be everyone's social media of choice, but right now it's been really great for me because they have all these built-in options that you can use to create your own graphics, and it's right there in the app. So the ones on the right, those are for the stories, and that's a built-in feature that is called, you know, ask me a question. You can just add that sticker onto a picture from your phone. Both of these pictures are of technically my pets, I guess. The dog is my dog, Pete. He just turned 11 last week. And the cat is an outdoor cat that lives in my neighborhood that hangs out in my yard. So I just put those pictures up there, added the ask me a question sticker, added some texts, and then people who ask me questions, it'll go directly to my inbox, and then I can post those questions anonymously with an answer, or I can respond to them privately. So it gives a great opportunity to have a conversation with somebody and also educate the rest of your followers at the same time. And then the orange box, that's, you know, something you can just post. You can just have, you know, a solo post and then leave that up and ask people if they want to ask you questions. It's just an opportunity to be a resource for your community. Like I said, the goal of this is to help people who are kind of struggling with their pets have resources to lean on instead of going straight to the shelter. There we go.
Thanks, April. That's really great information for us to have as we're starting to do this. And Elaine asked a really awesome question, in my opinion. So I will start answering it, and then Audrey or April, feel free to jump in if you also have advice. But she asked, how do you recommend that we become experts so that we can help others? And my initial thought would be, what I would do, since I'm not an expert in all the things, is I do start from a place of what I'm knowledgeable about. So get questions from people. And if you're really comfortable, you have cats and you're really comfortable answering cat questions, then you can field those. But additionally, like April had said, we are going to spend the month of August rolling out resources to you all on the action team. And part of that is so that you don't have to become experts in all the things. Sometimes you being that bridge and connecting people with their questions to a resource that's available is exactly what they need. So all you really need to do is be an expert on where resources live and sharing them out with people. So we'll kind of keep you posted on different resources that we have. And because we are a national organization, that's one of the benefits, is that we can kind of pull all the different pieces about fostering, about cats and dogs and behavior, and share those with you so that you can share those out in your community. Do you guys have anything to add to that for Elaine?
I think that's good. You know, learning where you can find the resources is often the most helpful thing that you can do.
Yeah, because somebody who is struggling may not have time to do that themselves. So you can, even if you don't know the answer, you can volunteer to help them find the answer. And sometimes that kindness itself is going to go a long way. Yeah.
So I did want to share with you guys, I have had the opportunity, fortunately, over the last couple of months to travel to a couple of communities in Texas. They are communities that are really struggling with a lot of animals. The shelters are pretty overcrowded. And I was able to talk to community members and shelter workers. And the common denominator that I found everywhere was people were struggling with resources, to Audrey's points. But some of the people were actually struggling with resources that were available and they didn't know where to find them. So I think sometimes we tend to minimize the work that we as individuals do, right? Like if you can't foster 100 kittens this summer or adopt 25 dogs, then maybe you think you're not making a difference in shelter animals' lives. When in fact, connecting people with resources that are available can make a huge difference in their lives. It can also really take a burden off of a shelter because the shelters are seen as experts. So when they're really busy and they're really short-staffed and people are reaching out to them for all the resources, it does make it a little bit harder on their day to day. So it's really, it can't be overstated how helpful it is for communities to really rally together and share out information and knowledge to people who are in need. Now I'm going to look at the chat, you guys, because I see a lot of questions coming in and I want to make sure we have time to get to them. Is there a way where people in this group can be connected so that we know who's living in state to bundle our forces? Jennifer, we do. We have a few places. We have a Facebook group. Excellent. Links and resources. And we will share out the links and resources with you guys as well. So you can join our 2025 Action Team Facebook group. You can post where you're from and build connections out there. If you go to action.bestfriends.org, we also have all of our people live there. So we have individual groups. You can search by your location. You can look and see what's going on in your state. We have petitions and effort pages, and it's a really good way to get connected locally. If you're not seeing things there, go ahead and email us at action2025@bestfriends.org, and we can kind of try to connect you out that way as well. Let's see. And then we have Mary Beth in Nevada, Las Vegas. She wants to know how she can get started with helping in your community. Mary Beth, I would say a really good place to start is, I want to say we have some people in Nevada, but go ahead and jump onto our website and see if there is anybody locally that you can connect to. If not, go ahead and put yourself on there so that we can connect other people in Nevada with you. I would also start reaching out, use the dashboard, see what your local shelters are doing. And you can connect with them. You can reach straight out to them and see where they're at, what help they might need, if they have groups. And so there's just so many ways to get plugged in. And I would say join the action team so that we can connect you with other community members, but then also start to reach out to your local shelters and rescues and see where they're at and see where they might have groups that you can plug in as well. Okay, we'll put the links. Oh, awesome. Sarah, thanks so much for already posting. Look at you. You're already rolling with the suggestions. April or Katie or Carol, if you guys see questions, feel free to call them out because the chat is rolling.
I don't see any more questions.
Helene, that's a really, you should join the Facebook group and post in there about your pet food bank in Boston. I think that you might be able to make some really cool connections within the Facebook group. Elaine, I do feel like we have people in the San Francisco area. So hop on there and email us if they don't have a group on there, because I do think we've had some people looking to connect in San Francisco.
Caitlin, can you maybe just speak briefly to what's involved in starting your own action team if there's not one in your area?
Yeah. So the first thing that you can do is put yourself on the map. We have local groups at action.bestfriends.org. So you can literally like create a group in your local area. And what that does is that allows people to search for you. So if April's trying to find people in Tampa, she can go to our website, search for Tampa, and she can join your group. So I would say that's the first step, is to make yourself available for other people in your area. And a lot of times we have people on the action team who are looking to connect, but not everybody is ready to take that first step and put themselves out there. And then I would also try to think about what you want to do in your community. So use some of these tips that Audrey had about the different things that we're facing in our communities across the nation. Look at the dashboard and see where your community is and think about what you're passionate about. We have a lot of examples on our action.bestfriends.org site of what other people have done in their community and what they are rallying around, because I think another really good point is that you can put yourself out there and build connections. And it's also really helpful for people to rally with you around a cause. So see what you might want to plug into in your area. And even one of those things can just be compiling resources. And you guys can all gather together and start sharing those resources out in your communities. So we have a toolkit as well. And if you really want to get going, we can share our grassroots organizing toolkit with you. And it's step-by-step on how you need to build out, on what you can do to build out action teams in your area. And we're happy to work with you and help you along on that journey. Any other questions that you see, Katie? Any other questions from the group? Okay, so Cindy's wondering, is Best Friends at the point yet where they're partnering with individual rescuers? I'm not a nonprofit shelter, but an individual and Alley Cat Allies Feral Friends Network in Kansas City metro area. And I'm overwhelmed with TNR requests of multiple colonies as far away as 3.5 hours in tiny towns with no rescues. Audrey, do you have any insight onto where she should get going, or would you recommend that she start an action team and really start to rally her community to support her?
Yeah, an action team would definitely be the way to go. Best Friends provides resources. In this sort of situation, it's mostly knowledge, right? That's how we can help you. We can help you with the knowledge of how to get the cats trapped and how to get them fixed and what's the right way to do that. But rallying your community is a great way to get it done.
Vivian, you can unmute yourself if you have a question.
Oh, sorry, that's my dog whining.
Vivian, do we have you here? Did you have a question? I saw you raised your hand. I don't think we have Vivian. So if you have a question, Vivian, pop it in the chat. Any other last minute questions? Oh, you don't have audio capability. Okay. Can we help rescues with low cost supplies? I have a dog supply business, but a lot of our stuff works for dogs and cats. Also need to know how to trap cats. We have a lot in the neighborhood. Excellent, Barbara. So I would say we do have a lot of information about community cat programs on our website and how you can kind of go about trapping cats and getting them sterilized and returned back to where they come from. You may need to look a little bit locally and see what your resources are for spay and neuter, because that is going to be really different depending on where you live. And you are welcome to email us if you're struggling to find those resources, and we can send you the direct links of where you can find that information. I would also say that, thank you, Katie, rescues can always use help with supplies. So if you have some stuff, I would start reaching out to your local municipal shelter first. A lot of times they struggle with those additional resources because they do tend to have a struggle on budgets. And sometimes they do have limited donations that they're able to procure due to government regulations. So I would start with your municipal agency first and just reach out and see if it would be helpful for them. We also have a list of like network partners on our website, so you could go through that list. And the dashboard actually has all the shelters listed out by community. So you can go to your community and you can actually find shelters and contact them that way. So I would start there. And can somebody pop in our email, because the chat is going pretty fast. So I am afraid I'm going to miss some of your questions. And if you guys think of them later, feel free to email us and we can connect you with the resources. And oh, excellent. You're helping some friends already. And we're happy to kind of answer your questions and talk with you later about that. Yes, we will be sending the recording out on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, we will send you the recording. Also, to kind of recap, as we've talked about a lot of things, I do want to remind you, we have a weekly newsletter, comes from the action team every Tuesday in August, and we will be rolling out different resources that you guys can plug and play. So as your kind of takeaway from tonight, I would encourage you to do one of two things: to start really digging into your local community and see what they're facing. What is your local shelter dealing with? What are the issues facing cats and dogs in your neighbor? You can use some of April's tips as well to put that information out there and hear from individuals about what they're facing and really get to know some new people. And then the second part is to commit to sharing one resource. And we will send you a resource that you can literally plug and play. You can post it in Nextdoor. You can post it on your Facebook page. It will all be there for you that we've compiled that you can share out in your communities. And if you do those two things, or even just one of those two things, you'll be taking a really big step to help your community and to start this process of building up that support for your neighborhood and your friends and your family and your local animal shelters. So with that, if you guys have any questions, please reach out to us. We thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Audrey, for all your insight and wisdom about what shelters are facing. I think it's so important for us to keep that in mind as we're figuring out how to plug in our own neighborhoods. And we will be sharing, Cheryl, PNG and JPEG resources that you can use on social media. So keep an eye on your inbox. We'll be sharing those out, and we will talk to you all very soon. Thank you so much.